Hello, I'm Samantha from the Makespace. You can find my patterns at www.themakespace.uk. In today's sew along, we're going to be sewing the Ven Tote, and I absolutely love this tote. It starts out cinched in and very, very chic, and then as you add your contents, maybe you're going to the produce market, maybe you're going to the supermarket, maybe you're going to the beach, maybe you're going for a day out in the city, it unsnaps and becomes this very, very lovely bucket style tote. I absolutely love the shape on that, and it's got a great size interior. Obviously inside we've got our usual pockets. I've got a double slip pocket there and a zip pocket, as is usual for me, because I can't make any bag without a pocket. If you'd like to modify it, you can add a pocket in between the webbing handles, or you can add some embroidery, some patchwork, some extra hardware, some bling. The choice is yours, really. It's your bag. And then when you want to convert back to your smaller bag, you just snap it up. The snaps are on the side seams there. The Ven Tote uses webbing. You can swap that out. You can make a handle instead if you prefer. The length of the straps is just about long enough to go over the shoulder, but you can make them longer if you prefer, or you can make them shorter. I've got a couple of versions here from Quilting Cotton, and the stabilizer in this is a fleece. I use a non-fusible fleece because I find it wrinkles less. It gives it a nice sturdy shape, yet it's still able to fold in neatly. And then we've got an ultra firm stabilizer with the fleece in the bottom, so I'm using Decaville 1 for that, just to give your contents a little bit of stability. I've also got a version here with slightly longer handles and made out of some faux leather. As you can see, it folds in slightly less easily, but it still folds in pretty well. It gives you a nice good finish on the base, and unsnapped again gives you that gorgeous shape, that big wide bucket tote bag. It's got an oval base in this pattern, and you'll find that the base fits beautifully. So if you're new to oval bases, don't be scared. I'll talk you through how to get that beautiful finish. So why don't you gather your supplies and let's get sewing. So the first thing we need to tackle is our stabilizers, and I'm going to start with the base. Let's have a little look at the pattern pieces. For the base, you'll have black triangles on your pattern pieces, and I've cut those out so that I can draw through those triangles onto the fabric, and I've just laid my pattern piece over the top like so, and then transferred the markings onto my Decaville, or my ultra firm interfacing if you're not using Decaville, and then again onto my fleece. And then all you do is sticky side down, pop your ultra firm stabilizer or Decaville onto your fleece. I'm using non-fusible fleece. Line up those marks and then fuse that into place so they become one piece. Okay, and then with the base we're going to get our fabric and just pop that over the top, right sides up, so you've got a little sandwich of fleece, ultra firm stabilizer or Decaville, and then fabric on top. Okay, add a few pins just to hold that in place. So I like a nice taut piece of fabric. I'm going the wrong way here. I need to think about how I'm going to pull these pins out actually. So I'll turn that one round. And this is only the base that's got this ultra firm stabilizer. The other pieces is just fabric directly over the fleece, and then we do exactly the same thing again. So I'm going to go up to my basting stitch. That's the longest stitch on my sewing machine, and I'm going to sew at 1/4 inch or 6mm just to baste this into place and hold it all together so that it acts as one piece of fabric as we're working with it. And take your time around the curve of this. It's okay to go slightly smaller on that seam allowance, but try not to go any bigger. If you're someone who likes to quilt, then you might want to quilt this base or do some fancy stitch lines or designs or something on there. Embroider something on. I know it's the bottom, but sometimes it's nice to have a hidden little feature underneath, isn't it? Okay, so I've just lifted up as I'm coming around the curves just so I can reposition, make sure that the fabric is not stretching too much. Back to the start where I started. Now you notice I'm using 2 different threads in my machine at the moment because I have chosen a really beautiful bright orange for my construction stitches, but I'm going to sew on some kind of beigey coloured webbing in a minute, so I've chosen to swap over and put a beige coloured thread in there for the moment. Okay, so that's my base, and I've attached my stabiliser, attached my fleece with my Deckerville sandwiched in between, so that's a nice firm base. If you want to pop feet in there, you can pop feet in there as well. Now for the main panel pieces, the exterior, we are going to repeat that but without the Deckerville. Okay, so I've got my fabric that's been interfaced, and then I've added my fleece, basted it into place all the way around the outside. And then on the back, what we're going to do is just trim away this excess fleece from the seam allowance. So I like to hold my scissors pretty much horizontally and just snip round there, trying not to catch your stitches. Of course I have already, just because apparently if you're showing somebody how to do something, you will always do the thing that you're saying not to do. But that's okay, as long as I don't catch too many, because these basting stitches are purely just to hold these layers together so that they act like one piece of material, one piece of fabric for construction. So go as close as you can all the way round without catching those stitches, unfortunately, like I have, but that's okay. A little bit more haste, less speed, I think. There we go. Okay, so that's our exterior base done. We can put that to one side. We are ready to use that. No, we can't. Hang on. I need to transfer my markings over. So I'll pop that pattern piece back over on top and just transfer these pattern pieces, so these markings, sorry. So that's the middle, top and bottom, and each side that we're marking. So we've marked the 4 quarters. Let's see if that could be no, that can't be seen very well. See if I've got something a little bit brighter that I could use other than a pencil. I might be stuck with just a pencil. I've got a pen. See if that works. Might have to resort to pinning it. Let's add a couple of pins. I can just see my markings there, but I want to be able to see them quite easily rather than having to hunt for them. So I'll add a couple of pins in, pin in at each corner mark, or quarter mark, sorry, just so I can keep an eye on where those are. Okay, there we go, lovely. Right, now I can pop that to one side for the moment, and we're going to work on one of our exterior main panels. So that's already got the fleece attached. It's quite a bit floppier than the base because it hasn't got any Deckerville in there. And on this occasion I have actually marked my centres at the top and the bottom, so I'll add a couple of pins in so you can see where those are a little bit easier on the video. Now we're going to glue. Now you can tape, you don't have to glue, but we're going to glue our straps into place, and this just gives it an extra layer of stability and strength, so that when you're using your bag, you've got the strength of it being glued and sewn into place. So we're going to go, what is that, 2.5 inches from the centre, which is 6.4 centimetres if you're working in metric. These measurements are all in the pattern, so you can refer to them there. And I'm going 10 inches up from the bottom, which is I think 25.5 centimeters. I think the measurements are in the pattern, they are correct, or they have been double checked rather. So, oh, hang on, first we need our webbing. So grab your length of webbing that you've chosen, and you're just going to fold it in half and then cut. So you've got half lengths, and each half will form one handle. So here's a handle I cut earlier. Ta-da! I've done mine slightly shorter because I was about 3 inches too short from what the pattern states, and I didn't want to cut any more off the roll. And I've just added a little line of glue along the bottom there to stop it fraying. You can use fray check. If you're using a polyester webbing, you can just heat seal that. Okay, so I've got my length of webbing, I've got my measurements, just double check, yep. And then I'm going to add some glue, some fabric glue. You can add just basting tape. If you're going to be sewing this into place straight away, you can just add some basting tape to hold it in place, but I like to glue my straps before sewing them. So I'm just adding some glue along that edge there. And you've got to be quite careful that you don't go too far over, because you want it to be under your webbing. And then we're going to pop the webbing on. I'm lining up the raw edge of the webbing that I've sealed with glue with the raw edge of the main panel fabric. Okay, and then so my centre mark is 2.5 inches from the inside edge of the webbing, and I just press down on that to get that to sit into place nice and neat. And then we're going to go the same on the other side. So I'm going to line it up along the inside edge of the webbing, which should in theory then line up with the measurement from my centre. Now the key is here to ensure that this loop is not twisted before you glue the second side, okay, or you'll have an extra feature, which is fine. Just own that feature, that's completely fine. Okay, and then I'm going to glue this into place. Try not to use too much glue, just a little bit is fine, because you don't want it squirting out everywhere when you press your webbing into place. I just like to go up and then back down again. Pop your glue to one side, and then the second end of the webbing can be pressed into place, and I'm pushing it up against the edge of the ruler and then smoothing it down, and then I'm going to use my ruler to apply even pressure across that webbing. Okay, so now we're going to leave that to sit and dry, leave the glue to dry, but I am going to mark where 10 inches is, or 25.5 centimetres, because that's as far as we're going to be stitching to when we sew it on into place. And it's a little bit easier to get the pin through before the glue is dried, just in case I've been a bit too enthusiastic with the glue. Okay, so that can sit to one side and dry for a minute, or a couple of minutes, a few minutes I suppose. I should pop it back under my table, and here's one I glued earlier. Ta-da! It's exactly the same, except I forgot to add my pins in to mark where the 10 inches is. So it is true what they say, your elders are wiser, because me now is wiser than me a few minutes ago when I first glued this. Let's add a pin in there as well. Now to sew this into place, I am going to sew from the bottom up one long edge as far as my marker, across the webbing and back down the other side. If you want to sew up across and do a little cross in a box at the top, you can do. If you want to add a rivet or two, you can do. It's completely fine. I'm just going to keep it simple today and go straight up across and straight down, and same on the other piece, straight up, across and straight down. So that's fully attached, glued and sewn into place. Okay, as I said, I've got my I've chickened out of sewing bright orange on my cream or my beige webbing, so I've gone for a sort of beigey colour thread. Now you want to be sewing at about 1/8 of an inch or 3mm away from the edge of the webbing, but if you've got a stripe up your webbing like me, then it is a good idea to try and match that with your thread. So for example, my thread's a beige colour or a cream colour, so I'm sewing up the cream stripe with my cream thread in the hope that it's not so noticeable if I go a little bit wonky. It should sort of blend in a little bit. Okay, so I'm up at that marker, I've left my needle down, lifted my presser foot, and I'm pivoting, and then I'll sew straight across to the other side. And you know, on this occasion I might go a little bit wild and go back again, back over my initial stitches, and then over again to the other side. Now if you can't quite hit where you're trying to get to with your stitches, why don't you change your stitch length right down and just take teeny tiny stitches until you get to where you need to be, just to be nice and neat and accurate, and then you can change your stitch length back up and carry on. Okay, and you can back stitch for a few stitches, or you can leave your thread tails long, or you can do both. And I'm just going to tie these threads off just for a little bit of extra stability and security in my stitching there. And again on this side. And then I'm going to sew this second piece of webbing into place as well. I'm going to start at the bottom, exactly the same as I did for the first side, just repeating what works. Back up to the marker, so I'm pivoting, lifting my presser foot and pivoting, and sewing across the width. And back again, just for a bit of extra stability. And across. And go down to a smaller stitch length just so I can reach where I want to go. There we go. And back down to the bottom. There we go. Right, let's tie these threads off. There we go, one side. Just tied a double knot, I guess it's called, double knot. 1, 2, and then give it a little trim. Okay. Right, let's double check in my pattern that I haven't missed anything. No? Okay. So now we need to repeat that with the other panel. So I'll leave you to have your glue set and sew your webbing on, and then come back and meet me and we'll sew the two panels together. And with the magic power of television, I have completed both of my exterior main panels with my webbing. Okay, so we're going to pop those right sides together. So pop one right side down on top of the other, and we're going to line up the centers on these, line up the handles, and I'm going to clip them together Now I'm not sewing the bottom, but I am going to clip the bottom just so that we can make sure that they stay nice and even throughout the sewing. Okay, what we're actually going to sew is the side edges. So try and line those up as best as you can along the sides, and then give them a little clip or a pin, or both, depending on your preference. And just manipulating that into place there. And the same on the other side edge. That's this nice angled edge. Got a flat bit at the top and the bottom just to help with sewing. There we go. Just line these up. So when we sew these, we're only going to sew these side edges. We are not going to sew the bottom or the top at all. Okay. We're going to sew using our regular stitch length and our regular seam allowance of 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre. I'm going to back stitch at the start and at the end. Okay, so just be aware of that angle there. Make sure you follow that as best you can. Okay, and I'm just pivoting where I've got to that angle at the bottom and all the way to the bottom and back stitch. And then trim those threads. I'm trying really hard to trim all my threads recently, but it doesn't seem to be working. I still end up with loose threads in my final bag. Right, now you can either sew from the bottom or you can flip it over and sew from the top so that you've sewn from the top on both edges. It doesn't really matter. Okay, and back stitch, come to the angle and pivot. Sewing down as far as that angle, pivoting and to the bottom edge and back stitch. Okay, and trim that thread and this one. Now usually I like to do my interior first so that I can have a bit of a quick finish, or feel like I've had a quick finish at the end, but on this one I've sewn the exterior first so that I feel like I've had a nice quick finish now, and then I've got something to carry on motivating me. Right, so I'm going to snip into the seam allowance here where I've pivoted on those straight bits. Don't snip as far as the actual stitch line. I've had to go a few times just to get through that fleece. There we go. And I'm also just going to snip into, come a bit more in the centre, snip into that bit at the top there where we've got the extra little bit. And here again. On that bit, just to make it a little bit easier in the next step. Okay, so the next step, we're going to press these seam allowances open. So I'm going to get my, if you're used to watching my videos, you'll know I've got a tiny ironing mat, but I have actually upgraded since the last video. Woo! Very fancy. I've got a proper little ironing board. Look at that. I mean, it's not as sturdy as an actual ironing board, but it's pretty good, I think. So we are going to press these seam allowances open. If you've got an actual ironing board nearby, then pop your bag over the end as far as you can. Let's see if I can get this in shot. Oh no, it's a disaster. I've dropped all my clips. Oh dear. I'll just move these out of the way. This is the problem with working in a small space. I'm very sorry. Please forgive the unprofessionalism there, as we like to call it, real life. Right, so just so you can see a little bit. So if you've got a proper ironing board, pop your bag over the end of the ironing board and use it like so. I haven't really got enough space for that. So what I'm going to do is employ a sleeve board as well. Now this is a very old sleeve board and has got a bit of a retro cover on it. It's very well used, very well loved. And what we're going to do is just open up these seam allowances and give them a little press. Okay. Now you can use some steam. I like to use a bit of steam. I haven't got any water in my iron at the moment just because I'm limited on space and I'm concerned I might knock my iron over. So I've got a little spray bottle with some water in. I can just spray that and then press over it. That'll give me a nice bit of steam there. Just pressing those open as best I can. If you can't press because you're using a vinyl or something that can't be pressed, then open up these seam allowances manually and add a few stitches in the seam allowance at the top and the bottom just to hold those open, because when it comes to adding our base, it's going to be so much easier if you can have those seam allowances open as much as possible. Okay. Right, so we'll just swap over and I'll do my second side. Now this is, believe it or not, this is easier than my tiny pressing mat, although I know that it looks a bit awkward on camera. I think it's just that I'm working in a little bit of a tight space, but that's okay. A tight space is better than no space, so I'm definitely not complaining because I am very thankful that I have got a dedicated sewing space. And in fact, a dedicated filming space. It's very, very, very lovely and luxurious. But it is a bit tight. Right. There we go. So those seam allowances are lovely and open. I'll pop my little sleeve board to one side. Just double check. Yep, that's great. Okay, so we've got all the mod cons in the studio now, a proper little ironing board, everything. Okay, although actually, to be fair, the little ironing board was given to me as a gift, so I can't really sort of take much credit for that. Right, so once you've got your side seams pressed open, you can either leave those to set if you want or carry on straight away. I'm going to carry on straight away. Now what we're going to do, we're going to match the base to the exterior panels, and we're going to match up these middle marks or these centre marks that are on the sides, the short sides, to the side seams. So I'm going to pop it inside for a minute, and I know where that side mark is because I added a pin. So I'm going to match that up to the side seam of the main panels and pin that into place, and then flip it around, and we're doing these right sides together. So that's why it seems like the base is inside the main panel at the moment, just so that we're right sides together. Okay, so the two side seams are matched. I'm going to do the center of the main panel and the center of the base. So I can see my mark there. Let's line those up and then add my pin back through there. And the same on this side as well. So we'll end up with these two pieces pinned and matched in. Hang on, I've got an extra pin in there. I can feel it. Let's get that now before we go any further, because I do have a habit of getting myself into trouble with pins. Okay, so we're pinned in 4 places. Now we're just going to work our way round the oval, pinning that into place. And you shouldn't need to snip into your seam allowance to match this, but if you do, then do, okay? Don't panic too much or worry. If you need to, if you're finding that the main panel is not quite long enough to go around the base, just add a few little snips into the seam allowance of the main panel, and you should be able to ease it round that curve of the oval. And anywhere that it's a bit thick and you can't pin, just add a little clip. So like through my webbing. So I'm just doing the best I can to match it up nice and neat and ease it around that curve of the oval. If you're prone to staple basting, so that's where you would staple this into place, then just make sure that you snip those staples or remove those staples before you cut your seam allowances. Otherwise you're going to blunt your scissors later on. If you haven't heard of staple basting, then you might want to have a little look at that. Just holds everything in place nice and neat. If you're a fan of hand basting, then after pinning this I would recommend a hand baste, because it is nice and neat, much easier on the sewing machine if you've hand basted, although we all know how much of a fan I am not of hand basting, so I shall not be hand basting on this occasion, even though it does give a much neater finish, and I wish I was a fan of hand basting, because I would have a much neater bag at the end of it. Right, just doing this last quarter, just matching everything up. You can always put your hand in and just smooth out that section where it meets the base, okay. There we go. Right, lovely. I am pinned and clipped into place. So now I'm going to sew around the entire base. It's easiest to sew it with a base up, but if you're going to get any puckers, they will come when you're sewing with base up. So if you want to control any puckers, then do so with a base down, and you can just manipulate your fabric and sort of smush it out of the way as you go around. I would recommend starting on one of the flatter edges, and we're going to sew using our regular stitch length. Just move my water bottle out of the way, and there we go. Right, so pop this under your presser foot, and we're sewing with a regular seam allowance of 3/8 of an inch or 1 centimetre, and I'm starting with my needle down so that if I need to readjust my hands, I know that my fabric is not going anywhere. Okay, and I'm going to back stitch at the start, and as we come up to a curve, I'm just pulling that fabric nice and taut, so that I can make sure that there's least chance of puckers as possible in this curved base. I'm just manipulating this as I go round, moving the fabric into place to make sure that as it goes under the presser foot, it is nice and flat with no puckers. And as we go over the side seam there, I've just made sure that my side seam remains open. Okay, as we carry on round, and I'm just taking my time and readjusting every now and then, just so that the fabric that goes under my needle, under the presser foot, is nice and flat. Doesn't matter what's going on anywhere else, as long as what goes under your presser foot and under the needle is flat, then you should be okay. It might be that you're happy to embrace any puckers, and that is great, but if you're not, then a few extra seconds just adjusting will be quicker than having to unpick and re-sew those little bits you're not happy with. Okay, So I'm back to the start. So I've overlapped and back stitched just to be sure that I don't have any little gaps in my base. And we'll take all of these pins and clips out. Bring my pin cushion over here. And just make sure that I've got all the pins before I do anything else. Even the one in the centre that's facing the wrong way. I do have a habit of getting myself caught on those ones because I forget they're there. Oh look, there's one there. Okay, right, I can't see any extra pins. Now I'm going to have a little feel from the inside and double check, just run my hand around that base and double check that I'm happy with that entire seam. I think I am happy, but I'm just going to have a quick look, so you can just have a little look inside. And you need to really press against the seam if you want to find out if there's any puckers, because at the moment we've still got the bulk in the seam allowance, which will be pushing it in, rolling it in on itself. Once you're happy with that, then it's time to snip the excess seam allowance using pinking shears. Now I wouldn't cut over where the webbing is attached. You don't want to weaken where the straps are, so I'm just going in between here. Take my excess fabric out of the way, and the same on this side in the middle. Okay, and then I'm also, another stray pin, gosh, where are they coming from? Also going to do around this end curve here, and just take your time to make sure that you're not snipping into the seam line. Just taking the excess out. And again on this end. And there we go. Okay, so you've just taken the excess bulk out of this seam allowance, which should help it to sit nice and proud when you turn it right sides out. And you can now turn it right sides out, push that seam line out, sort of finger roll it or push it however you want to. Don't be afraid of hurting it, you're completely fine. This is a practical item, this bag, and you can admire your beautiful bottom with no puckers. Absolutely gorgeous, lovely bottom. I love your bottom, it's very nice. Oh, thank you. Oh dear, if somebody could hear me, I have no idea what they would think. Luckily I'm in the studio on my own today, so we're okay. Right, once you have done that, you've really got the feel of how your finished bag is going to look. So now we need to move on to our lining. So you can pop your exterior somewhere where you can see it, somewhere out of the way, but where you can see it, just to carry on motivating you. And we're going to work on our lining panels now. So for the lining, we need one lining main panel. I'm using this bright orange, which I think will go really nice with my floral fabric. Flowery. I think I was going for flowery or floral, and I kind of mixed the two. Anyway, I think it'll go very nicely. And I've got the same fabric for my zip pocket. Looking at the camera, this looks super bright. I'm very sorry. And then I've got a zip as well. Now you've cut two pocket pieces, one at 90 degrees to the other. Just if you're using a contrast fabric or something that's got a print on it. This one's plain, so this one doesn't matter really. Okay, and we're going to pop this one, and this is the piece that is taller than it is wide. I'll turn it over so you can see it. Okay, so I'm going to pop this right sides down on top of our lining main panel, right sides together. Okay, I'm going to match it up with my center mark, and then I'm going to pop it 3 inches or 7.5 centimeters up from the bottom. These measurements are all in the pattern, as I said before. So we'll line that up on the centre mark on the lining main panel and the centre mark on my pocket piece. I've amazed myself on this one because I've actually got my centre marks marked, which is unusual because normally I do it in the video, even though it says to do it at the start. And I didn't quite do it at the start, but I have done it at the start of each section, if that helps. Right, we're going to pop we're going to draw a box on top of the pocket piece, and we're going to put that 4 inches or 10 centimetres up from the bottom. And I'll mark the centre of that because we're going to make this box 7 inches or 18 centimetres long. So I shall mark either end. And then we're going 3/8 of an inch high or 1 centimetre. Now my zip is longer than the specified zip, just because it matched really nicely, and I thought, well, I'd rather have a well matched zip than one that was the right length but clashed. I'm going to draw a line along the centre of this box and a little triangle at each end. Okay, like so. Might add a couple of pins in there just to stop it shifting around while I'm sewing it. I've gone back to my bright orange thread if you hadn't already noticed. Right, just checking the pattern piece, check I haven't forgotten anything. Sorry, pattern instructions. Right, we are going to sew around the outside of this box using our regular stitch length, and we're going to sew directly on the line. However, when we come up to the corner, I'm going to start around about here-ish, I think, and I'm going to sew to the corner. When we get close to the corner, if I don't think I'm going to hit it exactly, I can decrease my stitch length so that I can get directly into, very precisely, exactly into that corner. Then I can leave my needle down, lift my presser foot and pivot. So as far as this corner, again, if I think I'm not going to get the corner exactly, then I can decrease my stitch length and then carry on all the way around like so, so that I've sewn around the entire outside of the box. Right, so I'm on my normal stitch length and I'm using my bright orange thread. I don't think I've ever used such a bright colour fabric and thread combination. It's very cheery, very, very cheery. Now I'm not going to backstitch, I'm just going to overlap a couple of stitches at the end. Oh, I managed to hit right in the corner, exactly on that corner. But on this little side edge, I'm just going to take it stitch. Oh gosh, oh, I did it again. Oh my goodness. Oh, I don't know what to do with myself now. I'm all discombobulated. So I'll carry on along the bottom edge. This would be a real undertaking if I managed to do it a third time. Let's have a look. Not quite. So I'm going to decrease down to 1. Take one little stitch. I'm actually directly in the corner there now. Go back up to what I think was my stitch length before. Yes, it must have been because I'm exactly in the corner there. Pivot and back round to where we started, and I'm going to overlap just a couple of stitches there. Okay. And on the other side I snip those threads as well. Okay, lovely. Absolutely beautiful. And take my pins out before I forget and get spiked by a pin. Now this is where we get the tiny ironing board out again. Well, I suppose I should probably call it a medium ironing board because it's not tiny like the other one was, but then it's not big, is it? It's not a full-size one. Okay, right. Oh, hang on. Oh, okay. There we go. Ta-da! Just make sure I'm nice and steady. Now that we've sewn around that box, I'm just going to steam press these stitches, and that will help them sit really nice into the fabric and give it a little bit of a spritz there. I've just got plain water in my spritz bottle because I've got nice soft water here. If you've got hard water, you might want to use special water. Okay, might have spritzed a bit too much there. Now what we're going to do is pull these, hang on, let me double check what the instructions say. Yep. So we're going to pull the pocket piece away from the main panel and steam against those lines of stitching. So I'm just pushing against that stitch line. And this side. And the two short edges. And that just means that we get a real nice crisp finish when we turn this through. You are inevitably going to get some creases when you do a zip pocket like this. So if you can control where those creases end up, and you'll end up with a lovely, lovely neat finish. Right, so we've steamed that. Now we're going to cut through this central line. I'm going to start in the middle, there-ish. And I'm going to cut along that central line as far as the triangle. I am struggling a little bit to find scissors that are sharp to their point. It could be the way that I use my scissors, that they start off sharp to their point and then don't end up like that very quickly. Okay, there we go. And as we get to the triangle, I'm just snipping along each arm or each branch of the triangle into the corner, making sure not to snip through any of those stitches that are around the box. There we go. Okay, have a snip through a stitch. No, phew, very close. That was, very nearly did. Now, once we've snipped through that box, we can push this pocket piece through to the wrong side. Just give it a little tug, nice gentle tug. And then over onto the right side. And we're just going to finger roll this or manipulate it or whatever it is that you like to call that. Just so that that seam line is exactly on the edge. And I'm going to steam press one edge at a time. So I've done that bottom edge. I'm going to press that. Great. And then I'm going to get the top edge into place. Nice and neat. Like so. And give that a little press. And actually, naturally, as I've done that, the two short side edges have fallen into place naturally as well. Right, I've got a few little tiny creases, so I'll just add a little bit more water, add a bit of steam. There we go, beautiful. So in theory, any creases that you get should be hidden on the back, on the pocket piece side. So we'll flip over now and find the truth. Let's have a little look. Beautiful. So we've got a few little creases, but they are on the wrong side. So I can get rid of this ironing board for the moment. We will use that again one more time. Now on the wrong side, I'm going to add a little bit of double-sided sticky tape, or double-sided basting tape is its actual name. And I'm going to add it to the top and the bottom of the box. I keep my tape in a plastic bag because it does get damp in the studio and I don't want it to get too damp. And then we've got a dehumidifier running, so I don't want it to get too dry and dry out. So I figured if I just keep it in a bag, keep it nice and moist, but not too moist. There we go. Okay. So just a bit of tape at the top and the bottom, and I'll put my tape away. There we go. Now we get the backing off of this. I've got some tape in the studio and it's very, very difficult to get the backing paper off. I have to be careful. This one's not it, fortunately. I think I would have still been here. We would have had to do one of those comedy speedy uppy bits in the video. Right, now we're going to add our zip right sides down. I'm just going to, so I like my zip to go from that way to that way, so it should go this way, okay? As I said, my zip is a little bit too long. So I'm going to probably position it so that the metal stopper there is off the edge, so I can trim the metal stopper out of the way. And I know exactly where it is then. I'm not in danger of sewing over it and breaking a needle. And turn it over to the right side, and if you need to adjust the positioning of this through the window, through the box, you can. This is very bright, this fabric, isn't it? Okay, right. So once you're happy with that, I'm going to pop this over to the sewing machine. You can sew it with your regular stitch length, or you can go slightly longer if you want a top stitching stitch length. And I'm going to start sewing down here, and I'm going to sew around the outside of the box. Stop at the corner with my needle down as we did before. So if you need to decrease your stitch length to get around the corner, then you can. Pivot, so to this corner, again pivot all the way around the outside of the box there, sewing this zip into place. We're going to sew at 1/8 of an inch or 3mm ish away from the edge. Ish means approximately for those of you who are not in the UK. And I've left my thread tails nice and long so that I can tie them off at the end. As you get close to that zip pull, just lift your presser foot, move the zip pull out of the way, lower your presser foot and carry on. Okay, so we're near the end, so we pivot, sew across the short end and pivot. Now I don't think I'm quite in the right place, so I'm just going to decrease my stitch length down and take a tiny little one. There we go, perfect. And carry on, and as I come back towards that zip pull, just lift my presser foot, move the zip pull out of the way, lower the presser foot and carry on. One more stitch, there we go, pivot. And pivot, let's see where we get back to. Yeah, I think that's fine actually. And then back to where we started. Now when I pull this off, should lift my needle really. I'm leaving my thread tails nice and long. Just going to flip over to the back and tug on those thread tails, and I should be able to get my top thread coming through to meet the bobbin thread. There's one of them through. I think I've still got another one here. Hang on, nearly. There we go, beautiful. So now that I've got all 4 threads through to the back, I can just tie those off. I've divided them into 2. Just to make it slightly easier. Tie them off with a couple of knots. Lovely, and trim that. Now, as I said, my zip is too long, so I'm going to trim this down. I'm going to use my pinking shears to make sure that that doesn't fray. And it's the same on this side. There we go. You can add a little bit of fray check to that if you would like. And then we're going to, first of all, I'm going to move my zip pull into the middle so that it's out of the way. And then we're going to pull this top edge down to meet the bottom edge of the pocket, and we're going to pin that. Now I've put my pins somewhere, there we go. Put them somewhere safe. I couldn't remember where I'd put them. There we go. So all we're going to pin through is just the pocket piece layers, okay? We're not going to pin through the lining main panel. just the pocket piece there. And we'll add some pins to the side just to keep these layers nice and together while we're sewing, while we're working with them. Now let's refer back to the pattern to check I haven't forgotten anything. Right, now we need to leave a turning gap in the bottom edge, which of course I had not forgotten at all, a little bit maybe. So I'm going to add a double pin in there and a double pin in here. If you're using a particularly thick fabric, you might want to leave a turning gap in one of your lining side edges when you come to sew those together. Okay, right, now we're going to sew around the outside of the pocket only through these pocket piece layers. So we can pull the lining main panel back like that, or we can flip it over like this and pull it out of the way this way. We're going to back stitch at the start and at the end, and we're going to back stitch at the double pin. So I'll start here, back stitch, sew to this double pin. I'm going to back stitch again, and then I'm going to increase my stitch length up to a basting stitch, my longest stitch length. I'm going to sew between double pin to double pin, then decrease back down to my normal stitch length. I'm going to back stitch and then sew up to the top here where I back stitch again. Okay, so we'll have back stitching at the top here and here, back stitching here and here, normal stitching or regular stitching, and then long basting stitching across the bottom, and that's going to turn into our turning gap later. Okay, right, let's check my stitch length. All good. So I'm just pulling my lining main panels out of the way. I'm going to back stitch at the start. And then I'm at the corner, so I'm lifting my press foot and pivoting, so into the double pins and back stitch. And then increase my stitch length up to my longest stitch length, so along the bottom. And back down to my regular stitch length and back stitch. And then pivot. Lower the presser foot and back up to the top there and back stitch. I can trim these threads off. Great, okay. Take my pins out. Now before we go any further, I'm just going to quickly steam press that little bit there. I'm going to just do it off camera, just so that you don't have to suffer seeing me with my ironing board and clumsiness or anything. Right, once we've finished sewing this, what we can do is take out those basting stitches, and then that'll be a nice turning gap, and when we come to close it, we can fold along that stitch line and we'll get a nice neat finish then. Okay. Right, this can go to one side, and we'll need our slip pocket next. So that's our second pocket piece. And then this should be the one that is longer rather than wider. Okay. We're going to fold this in half, right sides together. Doesn't really matter whether you went top to bottom or bottom to top, as long as you are right sides together and the pocket is longer than it is, wider than it is tall. Kind of made sense. Okay, I'm going to leave a turning gap in this one as well, so we'll add a double pin, and this one we're going to sew from the crease, or from the fold, sorry, and I'm going to back stitch at the start, sew until I get to the double pins and back stitch again. Baste across that double pin section, back stitch, sew to the top and back stitch again. So very, very similar, but just on a slip pocket on its own. Okay, so I'm back stitching at the start. So down to the corner and pivot. I've gone too far, so I'll take a stitch back. There we go. Pivot. Oh, hang on, my bobbins run out. I didn't realise I'd done so much sewing. My bobbins run out. Right, bear with me. I will change my bobbin and then we'll come back and we'll sew this slip pocket. I would say carry on without me and I'll catch you up, but the video will probably cut off now and then restart after I've done it, so you haven't really got time. Anyway, see you in a minute. Well, I'm very surprised. I had a second spool of the exact same thread so that I could load a bobbin without unwinding my machine or unthreading my machine. I'm amazed. Very happy. So that's twice now something amazing has happened. Although I did spill my pot of clips, so maybe I shouldn't go around thinking today's my lucky day just yet. Right, I've backstitched at the start, sewn to the double pin, backstitched there, changed my stitch length up to my longest stitch length, and I'm sewing across the turning gap now. Okay, and change back to my regular stitch length, and I'll do a bit of back stitching, and then sew to the corner, and pivot, and to the top, and back stitch there. Okay, lovely. Right, all good in the end. I don't know why I thought that I needed 2 spools of bright orange thread, but apparently I did, so it's all worked out well in the end, doesn't it? Right, now what I'm going to do, I'm going to clip the corners at the top there, take the excess seam allowance away, and then at these bottom corners I'm going to snip straight across and then also clip a bit extra away from the seam allowance there. And again, this will just help your corners to sit really nice and neat without that extra excess bulk of fabric there. Right, we're going to steam press just along the turning gap there. Now I didn't really think this through. I will have to get my ironing board back out. See, it was convenient having a tiny pressing mat because you could just pop it out again, but it is a lot nicer having a proper actual ironing board. So I guess it swings and roundabouts, isn't it? Right, so we'll press that turning gap to start with. Beautiful. And then I'm just going to unpick these stitches from inside the turning gap. That should leave us a nice line of holes, stitch holes, to follow later when we're turning the extra fabric, the turning gap under. And the other side as well. Okay, better put the cap back on that. Safety never takes a day off. Right, so now we can turn this through and we'll make sure to get these corners out nice and neat. There we go. All 4 corners, lovely. And just have a little roll, finger roll on the edges, on the sides. There we go. My corners are actually very neat today, so I don't think I need to use the end of my spoon to push those out. But if they're not nice and neat, do give them a little press with a tool. Okay, so once I've done the sides, what I like to do is fold the turning gap under. Make sure that that is nice and neat first before pressing anything else. I'm just going to give it a little spritz with my water so that there's a good bit of steam involved there. Once you're happy with the turning gap, then you can bring your iron out to press the rest of your pocket. Nice and neat there. There we go. Right. Pop that iron away for a moment. I did say before we'd need it one more time, but we will actually need it another one more time because I forgot about this time when I said one more time. So actually 2 more times previously, but 1 more time now, which makes complete sense, I know. Right, I'm going to increase my stitch length slightly to a top stitching stitch length, which is just a slight increase really. And then I'm going to sew along the top of this pocket where I folded it, just to give it a nice top stitched edge and keep those layers where they're supposed to be. I'm not going to back stitch on this, just tie my threads off afterwards. Okay, and pull those out and then tie these off at each end. It's funny, I don't think I would have chosen bright orange for this fabric if it wasn't for Georgia, who helps me in the studio. She sort of chose the bright orange to go with it, and I thought, maybe I need to be a bit braver. And I think that she's right. Maybe I do need to be a bit braver because I do quite like the bright orange with this floral fabric. Right, so we've top stitched the top there, and we need our second line in main pattern. I mean, you can pop it on the one that's got the zip pocket on if you prefer. I'm going to pop it on the other one so there's something on each side. And I'm just going to mark the centres. What was I saying earlier about having marked my centres? See, it seems that old habits die hard. There we go, and we'll do this side as well. Just so I can line everything up later. Now I've pinned one of my labels to the side there so that I don't forget to attach it in. And I'll find the centre of my pocket. Might use that pin for the centre actually, and then I know where it is. Right, now I'll check the pattern and see where it says to pop it. Let's have a look. 2.5 inches or 6.4 centimetres from the bottom and in line with the centre. So let's line this up. There. And the centre there. Beautiful. Don't move it, Samantha. I'll add a few pins in, just hold it in place, and then try and remember to add my label as well. I'm not very good at remembering to add labels, so I'm trying to really make a good conscious effort to do that. Okay, now I can fold my label up and slot it under the side of the slip pocket. There we go, that works out okay. There we go. Right, so as I'm sewing that, it will get sewn into place. And personally, I think this pocket is just a bit wider than I would use full width. So I'm going to mark with pins where the centre of my pocket is. And I'm gonna, when I sew this on, I'm gonna sew it into place up the centre to divide into two. So let me talk you through how I'm gonna sew this, because I seem to be able to speak without breathing while I'm sewing. So let's attempt to get my breath in first, or get my talking in first so I can breathe later maybe. Right, I'm going to start at the top here. And I'm going to back stitch. I'm going to do a few back stitches because this is an area of stress. And I'm going to sew down the short side to the bottom corner, pivot, and sew along to the centre. Stop with my needle down and pivot and sew up to the top and back stitch. Then I'm going to pivot and turn around and sew all the way back down again, back to my stitching line along the bottom. Then I'm going to pivot again and sew to the corner, pivot and sew back up to the top and back stitch again. So I will have back stitching at the top, sides, and in the centre, and stitching around the 3 edges and a double line of stitching up the middle. Okay, so in theory, while I'm sewing, I can also breathe now because I've explained it all already. We'll see. We're sewing at 1/8 of an inch away from the edge, or 3mm, my regular stitch length. A few back stitches down to the corner and pivot. As far as the center and stop, pivot. And up the center. And take these pins out as I'm going. And a bit of back stitching at the top here. And then I'm going to pivot and go all the way back down again. Pivot at the bottom and then along the bottom edge, and this will close your turning gap. And pivot and up the last side, and we'll back stitch at the top. There we go. Okay, so that pocket is nice and secure now. And trim my threads off. Check everything works like a pocket. We take the pins out. Okay, right, check everything works as a pocket. It does, 2 pockets, lovely, and I've remembered my label. Very well done to me. Okay, now we are going to sew the side edges the same as we did before. Oh, I found another couple of clips. There we go, it's a bonus. What do we need? We need our other main panel, other lining main panel with the zip pocket attached. I'm going to open that up all the way now. And I'm going to pop one on top of the other, right sides together. I'm going to line up all the edges. Now, as I did before, I'm going to pin the centers. I might do the top as well, actually, just to make sure that they don't shift, that everything is where it should be. Okay. Now, we are going to sew the side edges, but we're going to taper in. So you might want to draw your seam allowance on before you start stitching. So if you would like to, this is how to do that. I will pin it or clip it, but I'm just going to draw it on first so you can see what I'm doing. So our regular seam allowance is 3/8 of an inch. So I'm going to do that at the start and the end. Let's just move over slightly. And a little bit down the side as well, just so we can sort of turn the corner and carry on for a bit. Okay, and then we're going to go to a 1/2 inch seam allowance, or 1.2 centimetre seam allowance. So I'm going to draw that on. Okay, now where the smaller seam allowance meets the bigger seam allowance, we're just going to taper that. So use your ruler just to match those two up into a natural sort of taper. And the same here. There we go. Okay, so when we start sewing, we'll start at the 3/8 or 1 centimetre line, and then we'll naturally taper to a slightly bigger seam allowance and then taper back again at the end. So if you like to mark your seam allowance, then that's what you do. Just going to add a few pins to hold these sides together. And that will just take a bit of extra bulk away. If you've got a particularly flimsy lining, you might find that you need to take a little bit bigger seam allowance, just because it's not so rigid, it doesn't hold its shape quite so well. Okay, so I'm going to back stitch at the start and the end. We're only sewing these 2 side seams here. There we go. And we'll do the same on the other side. I haven't marked it on this side. I'm just gonna do it organically as but I'm just gonna wing it basically. It is much easier to follow a line. So I'm on the bigger seam allowance now. We're going to taper back down to the smaller seam allowance. There we go. Lovely. Okay, we can trim those threads. And then we're going to snip into the seam allowance the same as we did for the exterior. So we're just going to take a simple snip into the corner, the insidey corner. Should probably put these pins in the pin cushion, shouldn't I, before a disaster happens. Bear with me. Take these pins out. Okay, so I've snipped into the bottoms, and then the tops I'm just going to snip a little bit of the fabric away to reduce the bulk there. There we go. Okay, we are going to press these seam allowances open the same as we did before. So I'm going to put my pin pot away to start with before I get the ironing board out. I guess I could have just used my sleeve board for this, couldn't I? But the novelty of having an actual little ironing board hasn't quite worn off yet. So we'll stick with the actual little ironing board. So you know what we're doing here. We've got my little sleeve board. If you've got a proper ironing board, you shouldn't need the sleeve board. But you can if you like. There we go. I'm just finger pressing it open to start with. Give us a nice starting point there. And again on that end. There we go, beautiful. Little bit of mist for some steam. And we'll press this open all the way down the seam. As I said before, if you can't press it open, just press open what you can. Or indeed, just open the seam allowances and stitch them open just to hold them. There we go, beautiful. And we'll do the other seam, a little bit of a mist. There we go. And we'll open these. I'm just going to finger press them open to start with, just to give us a bit of a starting point. That's it. And all the way to the bottom if you can. Beautiful. Right. In theory, that's my ironing board done with, apart from a final press. So I can pop that to one side for the moment and pop it down on the floor. Here we go. Right. There we go, beautiful. Those are beautifully open side seams there. Now, we are going to add some magnetic snaps, which I know this is unusual, but we're going to center them over the side seam at the top. Okay, so the top are these larger angled bits. I can fold that back out of the way. My fabric's still a bit moist, but that's okay. We'll just ignore that. That's fine. Right, we are going to pop this over the side seams. I just need to get my snap apart. Come on. Oof, that was a bit tough. Right, we're going to centre it over the side seams and we are going to pop it. We're going to put the centre of the snap 1.5 inches or 3.8 centimetres down from the top. Okay, over the side seams, all right? It feels a bit odd, I know, but it's what gives it that cinched in little shape for the tote, okay? Could also add a swivel hook and D-ring, something like that as well, if you prefer. I'm looking for fray check. I've got 2 bottles here apparently. So we're just going to snip through those marks. Again, see it's the points. The points always go. Maybe I dropped my scissors too much. Do you think that might be it? It could be, couldn't it? I am going to risk it with a seam ripper, which I know and understand the risks, especially live on a video. Well, it's not live, is it? I could edit it, but it's an awful lot of work to remake this, just to pretend that I haven't gone through the seam, gone through too far. Right, that looks all right to me. Let's test it with the prongs of the snap first. Okay, I've done a terrible job of going through the seam allowance there, as in I haven't gone through the seam allowance. I've gone through the lining but not the seam allowance. Let's try that again. There we go, nearly. There we go, okay. Again, I've not gone through the seam allowance. I think I need to, I don't know, snip it from the back maybe as well. Better? Yes, that's better. There we go, that's the key. We'll snip it from the back as well. You're only just going through the seam allowances, but it does give it a little bit of extra something to hang on to. Check that's okay. Yes, perfect. Okay, lovely. Right, so now I can take that out again. Add a bit of fray check to make sure that those holes don't go any bigger than we want them to. And then push the prongs through from the front again. There we go. Flip it over to the wrong side. Oh, now we need a little bit of something on the back. Let's add a bit of foam. I had a scrap of foam on the floor when I came in the studio this morning, and I thought to myself, don't throw that away, because I'll need, oh, here we go. I'm currently crouched on the floor behind the desk. There we go, okay. Right, so I'm going to cut some little squares from this floor foam. I do usually tidy up after filming, so why it's here I'm not sure, but I'm very glad that it is. So I want to do about a 1-inch square or 2.5 centimetres square. Doesn't need to be huge. And I draw these prong marks on. Like so. A little snip and a little snip. And add that to the back of the snap. Nearly, there we go. And then the prong, the washer. Oh, I've never found adding a magnetic snap such hard work as I am today. Don't know what's going on. And then I'm going to bend my prongs inwards just so that they are pulling against each other rather than away from each other, just so I don't want them to slip out over time, because that's an area of stress on the side seams there. And then I'm going to add a bit of duct tape to the back, just for a bit of extra security on the prongs and to make sure that they don't rub through to our exterior fabric. Right, there we go. Oh, right, 1/2 is in. Who knew it'd be so difficult to add magnetic snap? Let's try again on the other side. I'm blaming the heat. It's very warm in the studio today, unseasonably warm, because it is supposed to be autumn and we've apparently had summer, although we've had a terrible summer this year, and now all of a sudden we've got a little mini heat wave for a week, and I expect by the time I publish this video it will be cold again, and you'll all be wondering why I complain about being too hot. But for the moment, it's very warm in the studio, especially under the lights. It gets very, very warm in this little room, and I'm right at the top of the building, my higgledy-piggledy studio building, which I do love and I am very grateful to have, but it does get a bit warm when I'm filming. Right, have a fray check. Oh, I didn't check it fitted. Oh dear. Let's see. Oh, it does. So maybe the error and the problem was the checking last time. Maybe I didn't need to check. Just crack on with it. There we go. Okay. Push it through and add a scrap of foam. I'll try my other scissors. Okay, maybe I should keep a pair of scissors specifically for foam, and then they won't blunt for everything else. That's probably a very sensible idea. You might have just witnessed a light bulb moment there. Bend my prongs in and a piece of duct tape going on the back. Beautiful. Right, let's check that they work, that they snap together. It works. Woohoo! Okay. Whew, that was a bit of a workout for me, I will tell you. Right, we are now going to add our lining base. So you should have just one piece of fabric left on its own, and that's our lining base. And if you haven't already marked it, well done, Samantha. Now's the right opportunity. Let's pretend that I didn't mark it on purpose, just so that I could give you the opportunity to mark it as well. There we go. Okay. Lovely. Now, again, as we did before, we're going to match up the short sides of the oval with the side seams of the lining main panels. So let's unsnap that so it looks a little bit less unusual. And then we're going to match the long sides to the long sides of the, or the center of the main panels. So we could do that one first. Get my pot of pins back, just so we've got a starting point, and we'll do the corresponding one on the other side. Try and add some black pins so you can see where they are. And then the center of the short sides with the center of the side seams. Like so. And then we're just going to ease our way around like we did before. Ease our way around the oval. And we're going to sew the base, or we're going to sew the base to the lining using our regular seam allowance to start with, and then we're going to go in a bit further and take a slightly larger seam allowance just to take away any of the extra bulk that we've got in this fabric, because the lining fabric is just nice and thin, so that will be slightly bigger than the exterior, because the exterior has got all that bulky stabilizer, that fleece taking up a bit of space inside the bag between the exterior and the lining. So I'm just working my way round, adding pins all the way round. Added a white pin just for a bit of variety. Variety is the spice of life, they say. Add a few more to keep things exciting, or as exciting as they can be without any actual danger. There we go. Okay, so that should fit nice and neat, and we're going to sew around the entire oval base. I'm just going to have a little bit of water. Okay, we're using our regular seam allowance, regular stitch length, and you can sew around the entire oval. Again, I'm sewing with the main panels up and the base on the bottom. Now back stitched. Just manipulate this fabric or stretch it out to make sure that what's going onto the needle is nice and flat. Sort of overlap slightly. Okay, now you can take the pins out at this point or you can leave them in. I'm going to take them out just in light of how clumsy I am. Okay, and I've got enough holes in my fingers from pins this week as it is without adding any more. Okay, it didn't feel like this many pins when I was putting them in, but apparently it is. Right, have I got any more? No. Okay, so now I'm going to go along and just sew an 1/8 of an inch bigger seam allowance, or 3mm bigger seam allowance. So I'm going to go along and sew inside the seam allowance. So my seam allowance is here and I'm going to be sewing here on the inside of it, just to give it that slightly bigger seam allowance. As I'm sewing this, just taking my time to move the bulk of fabric out of the way so that what's going under the needle, under the presser foot, is completely flat, and that's how I'm going to minimise getting any puckers or bubbles in my oval base. Okay, just take your time and sew it in stages. Okay, and I'm back round to where I started. I'm just going to overlap and back stitch and trim these threads. Okay, now I'm going to have a little look inside and double check that I'm happy with that stitching. You can turn it out and have a little look, just double check you're okay with it, if there's anything you want to go back and redo. And then if you're happy with your base, we'll just trim the seam allowances around these curves. So I'm not going anywhere near that stitching, either of those stitching lines. Just cutting all the way around the oval completely, just to take away the extra bulk from these seam allowances. There we go. Ah, lovely. Right, so our exterior is done, our lining is done. all that remains is to pop the two together. So go and retrieve your exterior, and then we'll sew the exterior and the lining together and finish our bag. Right, we've got both of our exterior and lining bags. Now I've got my exterior right sides out and my lining wrong sides out, and I'm going to pop them inside. Just pay attention to which panel is matching which panel if you've got a front and a back. I haven't, mine are the same. It will be a bit tight. Just squash your exterior down like that. Make sure these handles are pushed right down inside, and then we're going to match up centres. So we'll match centre main panels together, lining to exterior, and turn it around and do the same on the other side. Doesn't really matter how squashed it is inside as long as it matches along the top. Okay, so don't panic too much. And then we're going to match side seam to side seam, again with your side seams pinned open if you can, and then again on this end as well. There we go. Now we're going to work our way around the top edge, just making sure that it all matches up nice and neat. You can clip this, you don't have to pin it. I'm just pinning it to hold it in place because my clips are inside and I don't want to take the lid off, so I'm just going to use my pins instead. Okay, and work all the way around the top here, pin that in place. You can also leave a turning gap in this top edge if you think that the pocket or the side seam is not big enough, then you can always add it along the top edge, no problem at all. It's your bag, you can add your turning gap where you like. Right, so with the handles pushed right down out of the way, we're going to sew around the entire top edge. If you are like me and you've got a flatbed machine, then you're going to need to sew from the inside of the bag. Okay, so that's sewn with a presser foot on the inside. If you've got a free arm, you might want to use your free arm. Right, regular stitch length, regular seam allowance. I'm going to back stitch at the start and overlap and back stitch at the end as well. And we're just going all the way around and just moving this fabric, the bulk of the fabric, out of the way as we need to in order to get all the way around the top. Remember, as long as it's flat as it goes under the presser foot and the needle, then you won't have any puckers. Okay, so just manipulate this fabric around. It's got a big top to it actually. I do forget until I'm sewing around the perimeter. And we trim those threads off and get rid of these pins. Oh, I'm very excited now. We're near at the end of our bag, of our Ven Tote. And then we'll be able to use it. I could use it tonight. It's summery enough because it's so warm here. Well, I think we've got thunderstorms on the way, which is typical, isn't it? Right, okay, so that's all nicely sewn. Now I can take out my basting stitches from my turning gap. If you've left a turning gap elsewhere, then take your basting stitches out so that we can get in and use the turning gap. I'm excited to see what it looks like with this fabric combination. taking these stitches all the way along. And take that extra thread out there. Okay, then we can reach through, and hopefully we've left our zip open, which I know we have because we did it deliberately on purpose, and just gently tug that bag through the turning gap and right sides out, gently, gently. Okay, and as you push it out, you can push these seam allowances out along the bottom and along the top. And what I like to do on a bag like this, or a tote like this, in the sides there where we've pressed those seam allowances open, I like to just make sure that the seam allowances are still nice and open, and then fold it from the right side. I'm actually going to add a clip to that because I know that that is nice and pushed out, so I'll add a clip to that now. That side is done, then I can go and do the other side. Make sure those seam allowances are still open nearly. One of them's trying to close, there we go, and pushing against the seam. Give it a little finger roll, there we go, and then I know that that side seam is nice and rolled out. It just reduces the bulk a little bit on those. Right, oh, I love this. It's very, 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 very nice. It's a great combination. So I'm going to work my way around now, and if I had a nice big ironing board, I would probably give it a nice iron along the entire top, but I don't really want to do this on my little ironing board, so I'm just going to finger roll all the way around the outside of the top, making sure that the lining is pushed down inside and that seam is rolled out fully, so the exterior is sitting nice and proud. Tuck my zip pocket back in for a minute because it's pulling the top of my bag out of the way. Now when we do our final top stitch, you've got a choice. You can either have your handles up so you're top stitching through the webbing as well, or just around the top. Now I have previously done a it was the everything tote actually, and I stitched around the top and then I overloaded it, of course, and my stitching popped along the top there. So I think I'm going to overload this bag, so I'm going to plan ahead and not put my handles into my top stitching seam, in the hope that I don't pop my stitching when I overload it. I mean, really, you'd think I can't overload it too much, surely, because it's not that big a bag, but if it's possible, then I will be able to do it. And actually, I love the shape of that. It's a great big bucket shape, isn't it? Which is perfect for, oh, I can think of so many uses. Beach, shopping, trip to the city. I think that's great, actually. And then when you want it to be a bit more compact, just snap it up and you've got a chic little handbag there. Right, don't get distracted, Samantha. Let's do some top stitching. So I'm going to increase my stitch length slightly. Now, as I said, I've got a free arm, so I can't use it like I would a I've got a flatbed, sorry, not a free arm. Can't use it like I would a free arm. I want to sew on the outside of my bag. I want to sew on the outside of my fabric. So I'm going to turn my bag inside out one last time so that I can sew from the inside of the bag on my exterior fabric. Now, because I've got the snaps in the corner, I'm actually going to start underneath one of the handles, I think. And we're sewing using 1/8 of an inch or 3mm seam allowance. I've increased my stitch length slightly, and I'm going to sew around the entire top. Just be careful when you get round to those magnetic snaps. Be aware that they're coming up, be aware that they're there, so that you can be careful and not hit anything. I'm just sewing around the entire top. Take your time, nice and steady. Of course, this is neater if you can press the top edge first. Okay, now I'm just pulling my thread, pulling on my bobbin thread to pull my top thread through to the back. So how we tied our threads off previously, that's exactly what we're going to do here. I'm going to do it now so that these threads are out of the way, ready for when I come back to this position. Okay. There we go, we're back round to where I started, so I'll leave my threads nice and long and tie those off on the wrong side. Now my lining is nice and creased because of all my turning inside out and outside in and things, so I'll have to give that a nice steam press when I've finished, or when I go downstairs where my proper ironing board is. I think we're all very guilty of showing our bags off before we've finished our final press, aren't we? So I know that you won't mind too much that I'll be showing you my bag before I've given it a final press. Okay, and then I'm going to pull my zip pocket out so we can close this turning gap in the lining, and in theory your seam allowances should fold under nice and neat like so. There we go. And a little clip just to hold it all nice and neat in place. So I've folded along that stitch line. Got a line of stitch holes, haven't I? And I'm going to sew along there. If you prefer a hand stitch, then a ladder stitch will give you a completely perfectly neat finish and disguise the fact that that's your turning gap, but I'm just using a close machine stitch because I hate hand stitching. Trim my threads, double check I haven't left any holes in my turning gap. No, lovely. Put that back in, and then we can turn right sides out and iron it and then admire it, although obviously I'm going to do some admiring before I iron. Okay, I'll just make sure that base seam is turned out beautifully. There we go, lovely. Right, so that is our Ven Tote complete. I love mine, I think that's great. I love the shape of it, especially with this fabric, and that makes a really nice big bucket style bag, perfect for chucking anything in that you want to. And of course we've got our pockets, we've got to have our pockets because we like a nice practical bag, don't we? All like a practical bag, but it's got that gorgeous big shape, and then anytime you want to snap it up, it gives you that cinched in classy look of a handbag instead of it being quite so voluminous. So maybe on the way to the market you've got it cinched up nice and chic, on your way to the produce market. And then once you get there and you've bought your, I don't know, apples, bananas, watermelons, whatever it is that you buy, ta-da, plenty of space. So I absolutely love this. I am a big fan of this tote, actually, the Ven Tote. It's very simple. It's not many pieces at all. I think it's quite a quick sew. It's a great bag for making for markets, and you can always add extras. You can add extra pocket in here between the handles. You can add extra pockets in on the end. You can add embroidery, patchwork. You can add a bit of quilting. You can do something with the base. You can add feet. You can add hardware. I think it's a great starting point for your bag making. So I really hope that you do end up making one of these Ven Totes. If you do, I would love to see it. Please tag me at Sewing Patterns by Mrs H or at themakespace.uk. All right, thank you very much for joining me, and I hope you enjoy your sewing. Bye bye.